Okay, so my name is Brandon Gates. I'm an ED2 student at the University of Manitoba, and yeah, I want to go into the architecture stream and then get a master's in architecture after my environmental design undergraduate.
Okay, so our guidelines for this conversation will follow a thematic structure. We will follow a basis towards understanding and comprehending certain topics which develop in the realm of ecological design and architecture. This conversation will have a series of questions that will give us detailed explanations of our topic. It will lead us to obtain info we need for a compendium project. Our conversation will hopefully inspire and create new innovative means of going about this project. Okay, so our first question. What is your experience with ecological design?
So my experience has been kind of limited, but I have done a lot of studying about ecological design, especially kind of looking at skyscrapers and the amount of energy they use just to keep themselves cool, especially in the summers. So part of like the kind of modern language that's being used right now with some of these high-rise buildings is that they're completely covered in glass. And so we're all kind of familiar with the greenhouse effect, like our cars experience it, they heat up in the sun, but so do buildings, and at a larger scale like they heat up more. And so I actually did a case study on Dubai where we looked at some of the things that they're trying to implement in order to mitigate how much cooling or energy that they're using. And kind of the consensus right now is that we need to design something that isn't completely clad in glass. And so I guess my experience with ecological design has been sort of just thinking about ways to save energy and to save how much carbon is being put into the environment as a result of that.
Thank you. In what areas of your work do you incorporate ecological design?
So the scale that I've worked at mostly has been fairly small, but I did put together a plan for a house in my first year. And so for that, we had to look at a few things. One of them was ventilation. And I think that's something that kind of spoke to me a lot, just because when we think about ventilation, usually it's just, oh, this window opens. But I think that there's a lot more to it than that. And so to design something that's maybe a bit more open to the air, there's actually a building in New York. It's a high-rise residential, and there's like specific floors that are like completely clear so that wind can just pass through it. And initially it's part of the design to stop it from like meeting a lot of wind resistance. But I think that ideas like that are really cool and important to look at.
Absolutely. Were these ecological designs successful? Why or why not?
So yeah, back to my house. I didn't really talk about it much, but I feel that it was successful. You look at a few things when designing ecologically, and there's wind and light, mostly sunlight. And so when you're planning a building, you want to look at where the windows are. Are they south facing? Are they north facing? And depending on the direction, you want to look at where your building actually is, like on the face of the planet, because where the sun hits it is going to be different. And so like in a place like Winnipeg, we're far enough north that the north side of most buildings, like they're constantly in the shade. So if you wanted to have a window in the summertime that didn't generate a lot of excess heat, you'd want to have a window on the north side. And so that was something that I put into my house design. And for a south-facing window, I put an awning over top of it. So in the summer, it was shaded, but in the winter when the sun is lower in the sky, there is sunlight coming into the house, so it helps to keep the house warm and cool in the summer.
Awesome. How often do you consider the effect your project might have on the environment before or when designing a new project?
Recently, at the small scale that I was working in for this last studio semester, I wasn't really looking at anything ecological. And I guess if I were to answer that question honestly, I didn't look at it. I kind of neglected it. Um, but I guess it's really irrelevant as to the scale at which you're designing something, is that it's something that's always important and you can always look at it and you don't need to necessarily wait for like a big project to apply these kind of thoughts into. It can be whatever.
Thank you. How do you understand the term ecological design in the context of architecture?
So I'm assuming when you say ecological design, you're talking about like a building's impact on the environment and sort of like the carbon cost of it. Like not necessarily like actual money, but how much does it cost the environment to build this building? How much does it cost the environment to keep it sustained at a comfort level that humans enjoy, like throughout the building's lifetime? And yeah, you're just asking for my definition of ecological design, right?
Yeah, basically,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah. Then that's what I would define it as,
Okay,
is that
awesome.
it's like a carbon cost.
What are your thoughts on ecological design?
I think it's important. I think that we have been looking at the climate crisis for a few years now. And a lot of the time we're looking at the emissions of like cars or like industrial facilities and things like that, but we're kind of overlooking the day-to-day things that we do, like just having the air conditioning on or having the heater on in the winter. Like those are all things that contribute. And so if there's ways to mitigate those little things, then I think that's the way to start to come up with solutions for the bigger problems.
Okay. Do these ecological designs have oh, sorry. Do these ecological designs have a psychological effect on people when in a building designed with ecological intentions?
I would say absolutely. Now, whether that impact is positive or negative depends completely on the design that you've chosen. So I mentioned earlier we were talking about skyscrapers and how they're covered in glass and how that creates a lot of heat inside. But if you were to build a building with no windows, like that's not going to be a very enjoyable space. And so there has to be a medium, some sort of compromise between the two. There's a study done where people that worked in an office with windows were more productive than people that worked in an office with no windows whatsoever. And I think that really kind of speaks to like our nature and how we enjoy the outdoors, we enjoy the natural world and natural light. Um, and it does have a big impact on us. So if we were to design something that was like purely ecological and just focus on that efficiency like 100% and didn't take any mind for anything else, then I don't think it would be like good design per se. It wouldn't be a place that people would enjoy. So you need to have something that's like in between the two, where it is ecologically efficient, but also a place that people will go.
I agree, yeah. What would you say is the misconception people have when it comes to architecture and the ecological design factor? Do architects usually disregard it?
I think a misconception might be that I think it is kind of discarded, honestly. Um, and I think that that's because the misconception is that if you stray too far from, I guess, the current design vernacular, like the vocabulary that people use, the architects use to design their buildings, um, then it might not be seen as innovative. It might just be seen as weird, honestly. Um, I don't know how familiar you are with some like deconstructivist architects like Zaha Hadid or Frank Gehry, but a lot of their work is criticized because of their ridiculous forms. Like they're kind of everywhere. It's cool architecture, but you either love it or you hate it. And I think that if we like in ecological design, it's going to be some of the same situations. Like either it's not going to be ecological enough, or it's going to be such a strange design that it will be criticized.
How impactful is the role of sunlight in ecological design towards architecture? Does sunlight shape the architecture building of a structure?
Yeah, yeah, it does. Mentioned it a bit before, but like sunlight is really the thing that all of it hinges on. Is that if you are able to control the sunlight and how it interacts with the building, then you're able to control, um, yeah, the ecological design of it, the carbon cost.
Yeah. Do you usually like to include an ecological design when making a blueprint?
Like, do you mean I see myself as somebody who would like the one design that I've included in ecological design and has like the one blueprint that I've made for that has had it. Um, but yeah, like I said before, at like the smaller scale that I had been working in, I had not really given it much thought. Um, yeah, so I think depending on a scale, I would.
And this is our last question. What are your final concluding thoughts on the realm of ecological design?
I think that designers underestimate the influence and the power they have when it comes to things regarding the climate crisis, and that ecological design is something that needs to be focused on a bit more. Like I said, I'm even guilty of not really looking at it at small scale. But really, it's one of those things that it's in the details, and if we kind of focus on those little things that can be done, then they compound on each other and they become big things.
Thank you. By the way, thank you for answering these questions.
Yeah, of course.
Can you just do something? Do you want to share what got you into architecture? Like,
Yeah, sure. That's kind of a story, if I'm honest. Um, yeah, so I've always, not always really, but I have looked at buildings like my whole life and kind of like just, looked at them and enjoyed them. But it wasn't until I was in high school, I went on a trip to Chicago. I got to look at the things that they did for the design world. Um, so Chicago's history, they had a fire and they had to rebuild like a big portion of the city, and a lot of it was focused around the idea of density. So they built up instead of like out, if that makes sense. And so Chicago actually had the world's first skyscraper. I think it was an insurance building. I can't remember the actual name. Um, but the Chicago style of architecture like actually spread into Winnipeg as well. And so there is a really cool kind of connection between Chicago and Winnipeg that I saw when I visited. And that's really what kind of got me interested in architecture, like seriously as like a career option. Fast forward a couple of years, I applied for university to get into film, but none of those courses were full, and architecture was something that was kind of on in the back of my mind as a plan B. And so when all my first option stuff I couldn't get into, I was like, well, I'll just try architecture and see how I like it. And I ended up falling in love with it. So here I am.
Thank you. Yeah. Faith, should I add anything else?
No, I think that was really good. Thank you so much for taking your time to meet up with us.
Thanks, Brandon. I think we're done. Yes. Well, thank you so much for doing this conversation or interview with us.
Yeah, of course. No problem.
Have a great day.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Bye.